Walks like an animal, talks like an animal, must be an animal. Come hear the animals, talking animals, talking animals. It walks like an animal, talks like an animal, must be an animal. Come hear the animals, talking animals, talking animals.
Good morning, this is Talking Animals on WMNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. Before we proceed any further, I want to extend my enormous thanks to Bev Capshaw, who hosted last week's show in my absence, conducting a fascinating interview with Jason Cowan, Executive Director of Friends of Boyd Hill Nature Preserve, about vultures. The conversation was pegged to International Vulture Awareness Day, and if you missed it, I strongly recommend checking it out. Head to the Talking Animals archives on WMNF.org. The show date was September 3rd. Meanwhile, my guest on today's show is Dr. Melissa Miller, the University of Florida Research Scientist Assistant, who's also a wildlife ecologist with the school's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences in Fort Lauderdale. Dr. Miller serves as the lead investigator on a UF project that employs artificial intelligence technology in an endeavor to halt a growing problem with an ominous invasive species, a reptile devouring various kinds of Florida wildlife. Don't get ahead of us. We're not referring to the Burmese python here. In this case, the reptile in question is the Argentine black and white tegu. Tegu has a striking appearance owing to its distinctive black and white pattern with beaded scales arranged in bands. The animal is also notably stocky as lizards go. And this lizard's unusual look figures prominently into this high-tech project that Dr. Miller oversees. At its core, the project involves setting up a trap that loosely resembles a device used to capture feral cats. But the AI software paired with the trap recognizes when a tegu is inside and clamps shut. We'll explore the genesis of this AI-oriented tegu trap, how it's evolved, implications for capturing other invasive species, and more when I speak with Dr. Melissa Miller in just a moment here on Talking Animals on WNF. Meanwhile, coming up later on today's show, I'll speak with Marian Guizdala, CEO of Advocates for Service Animal Partners, Inc., or ASAP, a Tampa-based national nonprofit dedicated to securing, protecting, and advancing the rights and responsibilities of service animal handlers and the business they patronize. September is Service Dog Awareness Month. Part of our conversation will revolve around that. We'll also likely touch on other facets of ASAP and its mission when I speak with Marian Guizdala later in today's show. Right now, though, let's discuss the Argentine black and white tegu and using AI technology to help mitigate the serious problem with this invasive species with Dr. Melissa Miller, who's overseeing the research project. With a reminder that I invite you to join the conversation by calling 813-239-9663, emailing DJ at WMNF.org, or texting 813-433-0885. Let's welcome Dr. Melissa Miller to Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, Dr. Miller.
Good morning. Hi.
Thanks for joining us on Talking Animals this morning.
You're welcome.
So we'll get to the project in a moment, but first let's establish some context for the work that you do and where that work is housed. First, it may be worth noting that the University of Florida is a sprawling institution extending obviously well beyond Gainesville. Tell me about the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, the school's facility in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, so I'm an invasion ecologist with the UFICIS Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center. So UF has an extension center in every county, and some of those, about a little over a dozen, are also research centers as well. So I am at one of those and located in Davie, Florida. So South Florida, and all the invasive reptiles that many folks have heard about are pretty much right in my backyard. So.
Yeah, and is that why, I assume that's why you're situated there, because that's where the kind of, as you say.
Right, exactly, yeah. And I mean, Florida has over 63 established populations of non-native amphibians and reptiles, and the majority of which are lizards, which we'll be talking about one today. But yeah, we do research that provides natural resource managers and other stakeholders with information needed to make informed, strategic, and importantly, effective management decisions with invasive species.
Great. So you're a wildlife ecologist. Now, this might be a bit of a dopey question, but what exactly is a wildlife ecologist?
Well, in my case, I specialize in large reptiles. So for my research, I've studied the ecology of these animals. For example, I have projects with Burmese pythons, looking at their movement and behavior patterns, the reproductive ecology, and trying to learn about their ecology so that we can then use that information to essentially get better at detecting and removing them from the wild, because I do primarily work with invasive wildlife, which unfortunately means a lot of them must be removed. So for me, that's kind of what I focus on, helping natural resource managers to develop better strategies, to implement good control tools, such as the AI smart traps we'll be discussing, and that it keeps me busy here in South Florida.
For sure. So what notable differences are there between what a wildlife ecologist like yourself, researchers or otherwise, does, and what another scientist studying wildlife does? Is there kind of subspecialties across the realm of people that are interested in studying wildlife in some form or another?
I guess there's the generality in that it is wildlife, and there's the focus of the research is on wildlife populations or individual, species. So I think there's a lot of similarities there, and then of course, very diverse once you kind of dive into it. Are they studying mammals? Are they studying, like in this case, invasive species? So a bit of it might just be semantic.
All right, gotcha. So before we delve into the Tegu Smart Trap project, I'd be curious to hear about some of the research projects you've undertaken prior to this one. I mean, as you know, you seem to have specialized over the years in studying invasive species. First of all, what drew you in that direction initially, academically or as a research, area?
Oh, well, yeah. So I've always been interested in reptiles and particularly snakes ever since a little kid, finding my first one kind of on a nature trail with my mom. It was a native snake back then. This was up in Ohio. And, I've just always been fascinated by snakes. And then when I learned about invasive snakes, actually the brown tree snake, which is an invasive snake in Guam, and, of course, the Burmese python in Florida, just became fascinated with what you can learn from biological invasions. There are these, kind of natural experiments that otherwise would be unethical to conduct, and you can really learn a lot about the ecology and evolution of an organism when it's taken from one place and, where it's supposed to be and put into a place where it's not supposed to be. So really just fascinating line of research with snakes, right up my alley. So current projects include a Burmese python scout project, which you may have heard of those. Those are when you are essentially using the Burmese python ecology, in this sense, their reproductive ecology. They'll form these mating aggregations with multiple males and one female. So right now we have around 25 snakes that are tagged and being radio tracked via VHS tags and hopefully GPS here in the soon future. And then we track them year-round to learn more about their habitats, get better at knowing when and where to look for them, and to get better at removing them. But during the breeding season, when they're forming these aggregations, we can track our males to these large reproductive females that we would have not otherwise found. Because keep in mind, like, the majority of my research takes place in the Florida Everglades. So it's you've got a cryptic species in the case of pythons that's very hard to detect, and it's way out in the middle of the Everglades where you have to use airboats or tracked vehicles to actually access it. So they're in the challenges lie for sure.
And is part of that tracking the females and males the way you just described, is part of an objective of that to try to keep those two from meeting up if you have enough data to do so? Yeah.
So it's definitely helping with removing pythons that are not tagged that are attracted to your tag snake. So you're removing pythons. You're removing them from some of the more interior locations of the Everglades.
Yeah.
There's python removal contractors. I'm sure you've heard of the Florida Python Challenge, which is a big event down here. But a lot of the snakes, humans are limited in where they can go in the Everglades unless you have an airboat, which a lot of folks do down here. But you're mainly going, surveying roads and levees. So a lot of the snakes kind of come off of these areas. But, over 20,000 pythons, for example, have came off of have been removed from Florida like all the time. And with the majority of those coming from these kind of levees and roadway surveys. And if you think, we don't know an estimate for how many pythons are out there, but if 20,000 have been removed from these more accessible areas, what does that mean for the rest of the Everglades, of which, roughly 97% is inaccessible by any kind of easy means for humans. So the Python Scout removal programs, they get at these interior snakes, and that's definitely a benefit there.
Okay, so that's so extrapolating from those ones are there, it sounds like it's pretty staggering projection of numbers for the ones that you can't get to or aren't accessible.
Absolutely, yeah. We don't know. There's no kind of robust estimate for abundance. Folks or some colleagues and I are actually working on it with the USGS Fort Collins crew, trying to get at that. And haven't got there yet, but it's definitely on our radar. It's hard to know what does removing 20,000 mean if you don't know how many are there in the first place. Yeah. So, for assessment, it's key.
And I would think further complicated by the fact if you can't get to a certain area where there's probably a pretty solid python population, but you just can't document it or can't research it because of how inaccessible it is. That's just kind of a question mark in terms of your extrapolating those numbers, I guess, for the moment.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. So when you were describing kind of your work and just sort of your interest initially in invasive species, you made reference to doing some kind of research that you couldn't otherwise do if they weren't invasive species. So does that mean like there's limitations that would otherwise be in place if you're studying a certain species that is looser or not in place at all because the species is invasive?
Well, so it's kind of, I guess it's kind of my take on making, lemonade from lemons. So you've already kind of got the invasive wildlife, like in the case of Florida.
Yeah.
To pick. So they're already kind of here, and it's, we have to try to, and hopefully resources are available for managing, and removing those populations, and ideally trying to get totally rid of them from the environment. But while doing so, there are these, from just thinking like from an academic perspective, there are these kind of fascinating opportunities to learn about the ecology of animals and how they behave with, when you have a Southeast Asian snake, such as the pythons, or South American lizards, such as the Argentine black and white tegus, and you put them into an environment with our native wildlife, as far as seeing what happens. Like, for example, within invasion ecology, one of the reasons is that non-native species tend to do well in their invasive ranges is that they'll often lose a lot of their, like pathogens, for example, in the pathway in which they arrive at these invasive ranges. They'll have, they'll often have not as many predators as they would in their native range. So these kind of things, it's like enemy release. It can really help an invasive animal get kind of a foothold. And then there's kind of the paradox, in a lot of the native ranges, like for pythons, and to some extent the tegus as well, they're actually not doing that well. They're either threatened in parts of the region, at risk.
You mean in their native habitats, you mean? Or?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Pythons, for skins and, for the pet trade, for both species, really. So you have this kind of interesting dynamic where when you take a species out of its native range and put it somewhere else, you see the pythons thrive, you see the tegus doing, wonderfully. So there's some very interesting, like, ecological and evolutionary kind of questions to look at it, of based on what we know of, ecology in general and what happens when you kind of turn that on its head with a biological invasion.
Yeah. Wow. Sounds fascinating. Let me just let folks know who might have just tuned in a bit late. This is Talking Animals on WNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. If you did just tune in, my guest is Dr. Melissa Miller, University of Florida wildlife ecologist who serves as the lead investigator on a UF project that employs artificial intelligence to halt the growing problem of yet another invasive species in South Florida, this one being the Argentine black and white tegu. If you'd like to ask Dr. Miller a question about invasive species of one kind or another, or her work that we'll get into in a moment of this specific project, or otherwise just offer a comment, please call 813-239-9663, email dj@wnf.org, or text 813-433-0885. All right, well, let's turn our attention more specifically to the Argentine black and white tegu. Let's start at the beginning, and at least to an extent, the sort of origin story, as it were, as the tegu as an invasive species. So, to what extent does the tegu story seem to run parallel to that of the Burmese python?
Actually, in a lot of ways, the stories run parallel.
Yeah.
Between the tegu and pythons. They were both brought here through the exotic pet trade, where folks would have them as pets. And particularly in South Florida, a lot of folks will either keep their pets outside. These are very large reptiles in both cases, so often they'll require, a pet owner to build their own cage for it. And if you think, a lot of pets are escape artists, these not excluded. And if you're keeping them outside, there's also, unfortunately, the hurricanes and devastating storms we can get down here in South Florida. So there's opportunities for pets to be released into the wild. There's also, unfortunately, at times, pet owners that maybe bit off more than they can chew with some of these species. These species are long-lived, and they require, in addition to just the longevity of the care, it can be, expensive as well and really time-consuming. A lot of people aren't really cut out to take care of, for example, a Burmese python that could live, 20, 25 years, get over 200 pounds, and have to start eating increasingly larger prey as you're feeding them. So it's a commitment for sure. And a lot of folks do it, spectacularly. I mean, I have reptiles myself. I've always loved having reptiles. So there's many, vast majority of folks that take care of reptiles and amphibians are educated and knowledgeable about it and care greatly for their animals, myself included. But unfortunately, a lot of damage can be done by, just a few bad eggs, so to say.
Yeah, and it also sounds like, in addition to those things you mentioned, at least when it comes to the tegu, I guess if you are raising one as a pet you got from mostly the exotic pet trade, if they're not socialized, I guess, a certain way, or maybe even just generally, they can become super aggressive, and I guess they have huge, powerful jaws and pretty powerful claws. So I guess that can get ugly, and that's also, I guess, what spurs some people to say, okay, I've had it with this tegu. I'm gonna release it or take it down to the swamp or do something. And there you go.
A lot of times people think they're well-intentioned, They're like, oh, I don't have anywhere to rehome it. I want it to live. It'll probably be happy in the Everglades,
Yeah.
And, they are. Burmese pythons turn out to be pretty happy in the Everglades. But unfortunately for our native wildlife, that's not acceptable. So yeah, I mean, it is a challenge for sure. And these are just two of the invasive species in South Florida, the most kind of well-known invasives. And we have a lot more, that we're finding out that also are having impacts. So we've got our hands full.
And I think you kind of touched on this, but as far as the tegu goes, I think, again, not unlike the Burmese python, there aren't really any notable predators, I guess, or at least to speak of, in South Florida, right? So, I mean, if they are released...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But yeah, I mean, once they get to their adult size, which can be up to 5 feet, there's not a whole bunch that can eat them. And I mean, when they're young, sure, lots of things can eat them that are our native wildlife can consume the hatchling and juvenile tegus. But yeah, once they get that big, there's not a lot of predators. Most of the removal pressure is put on by humans. The other things that bode in the tegu's favor, they have a high reproductive output. They can put out like 30 eggs in a nest. They have a very broad omnivorous diet, so they consume a lot of invertebrates and small vertebrates, as well as plant material and seeds. And they have a broad habitat use, so they can do well in disturbed habitats as well as our more natural environment. So known impacts in Florida include predation of native species. They've been documented to have eaten hatchling gopher tortoises, which are the threatened species, eggs of our native crocodilians, the American alligator. We have a great video of a tegu raiding an alligator nest, which is kind of this big mound where the tegu's sneaking up, and we captured a video of it, and just plucking eggs out from this alligator. And South Florida is the one place where you have alligators and crocodiles coexisting. So it's not a stretch to think, if a tegu does that to an alligator nest, it's doing it to the American crocodile nest. So yeah, and then with the plant materials, even they're known seed dispersers. So we have a lot of invasive plants here, so like Brazilian pepper, for example. So if the tegus, are eating these seeds, one of the questions is, are they spreading these invasive plants as well? And that's just impacts through predation. With the competition with native species, we're seeing that more and more. So we have unfortunately captured tegus occupying gopher tortoise burrows. And you can imagine the gopher tortoises are probably not too happy about that. Who knows if they're eating the eggs when the gopher tortoises are actually, in the reproductive season and have eggs in the burrows. We've found more recently spread of parasites and pathogens. And, and to top off all of that, they're capable of spreading with and beyond Florida. So there's studies that have been done looking at, and myself included, a study I participated in. We took tegus from South Florida and we put them in, at the time I was in finishing up my doctorate at Auburn University in Alabama. So we brought tegus from South Florida to Auburn, and then we kept them in these secure outdoor enclosures and gave them like a hide, somewhere to try to escape the cold temperatures, and more temperate definitely than South Florida. And the tegus, the majority of them survived. And when we necropsied them at the end of the study, they were reproductive. There's no reason to think they wouldn't have been able to put out offspring. There's also 2 counties in Georgia where tegus are expected to be established already, right now. So the tendency of this particular invasive, the Argentine black and white tegu, to spread maybe, larger or greater than the Burmese python's ability to spread, northward within and out of Florida.
Wow, so they're really on the move, it sounds like. And from what you've said about like taking them to where you're finishing up your doctorate, et cetera, they seem to be able to adapt kind of to all kinds of climates and situations, not the ones you would think would be the obvious ones like South Florida, but it sounds like they could probably function well in many others as well. Right.
And they do it something called brumation. So it's kind of you can think of it similar to hibernation. It's like a kind of just a low energy or rest mode. So yeah, they can, in Florida they do that 4 months out of the year. So I have a trapping project that is ongoing in one of the 4 counties that are established here in South Florida. And yeah, they'll go basically into little burrows underground for 4 months out of the year. And, you think if they're moving northward and they're able to brumate, they're able to just wait out cold, winter spells. So yeah, their potential is alarming, which makes them a high priority for invasive species management efforts.
Yeah, boy, it sounds like they are equipped with all kinds of talents and abilities to,
Right.
thwart capture and thwart trying to reduce their population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does make management a challenge, and we have something that we use to kind of visualize where invasive species are and their trajectory here in South Florida and beyond. Many folks use this, but it's called the invasion curve, and it's basically just a simple figure that shows what happens when a non-native species spreads in over space and time. And the first part of that curve, is prevention. That's your gold, standard as far as mitigating impacts and preventing any impacts from invasive species. After that, it's eradication. If you start noticing a non-native early on, and you really do, early detection, rapid response is a big part of invasive species management. There's a higher chance that you can actually eradicate the species from that location. If you don't get that kind of head start on it, and the species has been around a little bit longer, you're in the containment stage, and that's kind of where we are with most of the populations or some of the populations of the Argentine black and white tegu. Maybe less so in Miami-Dade County, where they've been around a lot, in Hillsborough County. But and after that, it goes into long, like the Burmese python, long-term management and control efforts. So, and as you go further along that curve, the resources, the cost, the time, all of that just multiplies, and then you're just in long-term containment, like we are with the Burmese python. And there's an economic cost and an environmental cost to this for sure. So.
Well, with that continuum that you've talked about and what you've described about the tegus moving into other places or being, on an experimental basis taken to another place, are we on our way to, over time, the tegus becoming a bigger issue than even the python situation? It's
possible, yeah. I would say they don't get as much attention as the Burmese python.
Yeah.
But they have the potential to be just as bad, if not worse, and potentially spread further and wider.
Wow, that's pretty staggering. Just the thought of that, given how huge and widespread and sort of unsolvable the python problem seems to be.
Right. Yeah, and the Burmese python. It's just a lot of folks don't know. In South Florida, we actually have more than just one large constrictor that's invasive. We have boa constrictors, established, meaning like breeding population of boa constrictors. We have a northern African python, which is very similar to Burmese python, gets just as big. We have a population of Brazilian rainbow boas, which beautiful snake, but yeah, not supposed to be here. So yeah, we have other invasive, and there's only so much resources that you can put towards all of these. There's just not enough to combat everything. The state does a wonderful job with managing and keeping at all of these species with surveys, and here in our lab at UF, we do a lot of work, and some other faculty members as well at UF, research and manage invasive species. And everyone, that's the great thing about South Florida, is that it's between the state, federal, and local agencies, the tribes, NGOs, folks really do try to leverage resources and try to tackle these really big problems, given what we can.
So it sounds like, given the widespread nature and some of the other species that you just mentioned now, that it's almost like a matter of sort of the equivalent of triage in terms of, okay, what researchers or wildlife people can do to tackle all these, and you can't do it all, certainly not all at the same time, so you kind of have to figure out some way to prioritize where your efforts will be directed. Is that right?
Right, absolutely. And then in your objectives of those efforts too, with sometimes it's like protection of biological resources, like a bird rookery, for example, or targeting kind of specific areas where there's maybe a hot spot of tegus, or and just kind of all hands on deck. And with the case of the smart trap, it's also a collaboration. There's a lot of collaborations on work in South Florida, and in the case of the smart traps, it's collaboration with industry as well. So Wild Vision Systems are the folks, Derek York and Ben Stuckey, who designed the AI-powered smart traps, and I heard of them through, they won the Theodore Roosevelt Genius Prize for innovation with this trap, and it was just like, wow, looking at that, like, this would be amazing for invasive species. So reached out, and we started a collaboration to test these smart traps they had developed, and they made the software able to recognize the Argentine black and white tegu. And, we put them on a live trap and did a study where we compared the AI smart trap to a traditional, meaning just non-smart,
yeah.
The old tried and true. And we did a, one-on-one comparison with that over the field season, the active season for tegus in an area I was already trapping in. And, yeah, I mean, the potential with the smart traps is just astounding. They reduce resources in terms of the personnel costs by 94%. Bycatch, when you have a smart trap, it's trained to. Maybe I should go over kind of. Would that be helpful if I kind of talk about the training of
the trap? Let's back up a little bit, because at one point I was going to sort of get into the evolution of trapping tegus, and probably the non-smart versions obviously preceded the smart version. But first, let me ask you one other question that just came in a bit ago, actually, by email. While we're dealing more with pythons. This said, I heard that many of the pythons in the Everglades were accidentally released from a reptile distributor's warehouse during Hurricane Andrew. Is this true or urban fiction?
So the published literature supports that, based on population models and what would be feasible as far as what we know of the Burmese python's ecology, that they were likely started, the most parsimonious explanation backed by scientific evidence is that they were likely started by a relatively small number of individuals that were released in the southern part of Everglades National Park, which is kind of the Flamingo, is the name of it, area, prior to 1985. And that would coincide with what we see with where we're finding pythons, where the first kind of breeding events took place. Do hurricanes destroy buildings, and are there lots of animal, reptile breeders in South Florida in particular? We have some of the largest ports for importing reptiles and amphibians, and I'm sure that probably augmented the population as well as, hopefully, hate to think of it, but other folks, doing additional releases. I think it all is contributing, but the scientific literature supports that, a few individuals released in that southern portion of Everglades National Park would explain the distribution and the expansion of pythons that we've seen.
So that's really what launched the problem, and then there's been any number of sources subsequently over all these years.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Okay. Again, this is Talking Animals on WNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. My guest is University of Florida wildlife ecologist Dr. Melissa Miller, the lead investigator of a UF project that employs artificial intelligence to halt the growing problem of yet another invasive species in South Florida. This time, it's the Argentine black and white tegu. We invite you to join the conversation with questions or comments by calling 813-239-9663, emailing DJ at WMNF.org, or texting 813-433-0885. So when people realize, okay, the tegus is obviously a problem, what was the initial trapping efforts like long before AI entered the picture?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so the removal efforts for the Argentine black and white tegu started, say, around 2009. They've included, the traditional traps. There's also folks, our lab included. We have surveillance with camera traps out to try to identify areas to trap.
And can you, sorry to interrupt, Dr. Miller, but can you describe what a traditional trap back in those earliest efforts, what that looked like and how it worked?
Oh, sure. Yeah, in early efforts, but also still using them today. So a lot of folks might be familiar with, like maybe if you have like a nuisance raccoon or a possum or something, they're like have a heart trap, or tomahawk traps is the two models that we use. And
is it similar to what people think of when they think about trapping feral cats? Mm-hmm. Because it looks like the pictures I've seen kind of put me in the mind of that sort of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly that. Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. So they have a trigger plate. People would enter it. Normally they're feeding with a food source. In the case of tegus, we use a fresh chicken egg. And once the animal goes in there, the weight of the animal on the trigger plate will cause the doors to kind of snap shut, and then the animal's trapped. So those have been used. They're still being used. I'm using them in St. Lucie County just to well, we can go into that later. But yeah, so live traps and then the surveillance using the camera traps. We've done radio telemetry to learn more about the tegu's movement patterns and to get better at knowing where to put traps and where to look for them, what type of habitats they prefer. We've used, detector dogs. What else? The early detection rapid response effort. So that's tied in often with public outreach efforts in trying to engage the public to report sightings of invasive wildlife. There's a great hotline. It's 888 I've Got One. That is operated by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And people can report via the hotline when they see an invasive species. They can report to a website. They can report, via EdMap, which is another EdMap, EDVMAPS.org, is another avenue for folks to report their sightings. And folks monitor that. We have a dedicated person in my lab, and he monitors that daily. So
wow.
Just not too long ago, a water monitor was reported by the public, and we went out and helped coordinate a response to remove that animal. So there's been efforts for tegus, and a lot of these efforts apply to the other invasive wildlife. The traditional traps, in particular, they can work. We know we can use traps. Luckily, tegus, kind of unlike pythons, tegus will lend themselves to trapping. They can be easily trapped. Not all invasive wildlife can. So that is one of the the kind of the upsides to tegu removal. That is good news that they can be trapped. So, but to have in effect to really kind of get at the reducing the population, you really need to be able to have a high trap saturation, really high trap density over like a large area. And with the traditional traps, as we know, you have to check them. They're not just catching tegus; they're catching maybe a raccoon or a possum or another animal that what we call non-target species or bycatch could be entering that trap. And we don't want anything to happen to them as much as we want to trap a tegu and remove it. So they have to be checked daily, at least daily. Sometimes depending on what you're trapping, multiple times a day. And as you can imagine, that can become very resource heavy as far as having to send a biologist out there to check the traps and reduce any non-target species and to remove the tegu. So yeah, there was a lot of room for improvement with the traditional traps, which is where where the smart traps come in.
Yeah, is that like, are the traits of the tegu kind of what you and your colleagues thought, well, this might make a particularly good fit for using AI? I mean, I'm just thinking about the really distinctive pattern and the speckled bands, and I mean, it's an unusual looking animal, so I would think in terms of AI technology saying, well, that's a tegu there, as opposed to some other things that maybe wouldn't be as distinctive or singular in their appearance. That would be a huge boon, I think, for trying to use AI technology.
Yeah, it does help, definitely. It's just like, compared to like maybe an animal that's just like uniformly, gray or or one color. So I think that does kind of help. Just like a lot of times, like mammals are kind of easier to trap than or to train AI for than versus like reptiles, particularly smaller reptiles, can be challenging. But yeah, I think that banding pattern definitely helps. And yeah, I mean, with just knowing that the tegus can be trapped and knowing that we can have success with these traditional, non-smart traps, it really seemed like there'd be a lot of upside with using the smart traps if we could just cut down that resource-heavy aspect of operating a trap line, and that ideally is what we're hoping will let us saturate the environment with traps at the scale and spatial and temporal scales, needed to really impact the populations of tegus.
Yeah, so when an animal that's not a tegu wanders in there, which sounds like might happen, but the trap wouldn't normally shut. What if it does accidentally shut? What happens then?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Yeah. So, and you're right. So the traps are trained. The smart component of traps, like basically the camera and the software algorithms, they're trained. In this case, it can be trained on any species, really, which is another great aspect of the smart traps. But for our purposes for this study, they were trained on Argentine black and white tegu. So the trap is made to recognize the tegu when it enters it, and then when it does, the trap will trigger to shut, trapping the tegu. At that point, the trap operator would receive a real-time message via a web application, like basically, hey, you've captured a tegu. The operator can open that message of the trap. The camera will send also a photo to verify that capture. So the operator can, look at that and verify, okay, it is a tegu. In the case, say it wasn't a tegu, the operator, finding all of this is while the operator is remote, so they can just remotely release the raccoon or let's say whoever ended up there that wasn't a tegu. Exactly, yeah. If they in there and it's a little possum, looking back out of the from that image, they can just open the trap and open the doors, and it goes on its way. So yeah, there's a animal welfare component in there too. For both the invasive species and the native species. Is if it's a tegu, you can hurry up and go remove it. It doesn't have to sit there until someone, maybe it's trapped at 3 p.m., and you're not checking the trap till, or maybe a better analogy would be maybe it's trapped, 9 a.m. and you're not getting, you have to check your traps earlier. So it's not really an analogy. But either way, it cuts down on the time that the animal is spending in the trap for
So we're just nearing the end of our time here, Dr. Miller, but so what are the long-term implications of this? I mean, are there other species, invasive species that you study or work with? I take it that the python wouldn't necessarily be a candidate for a smart trap.
Yeah, they're not, because they're more kind of ambush predators, so they don't spend most of their time foraging, like seeking out food sources. But the tegus, there's other species like iguanas, and that's something. The collaboration amongst U.S. and Wild Vision Systems who designed this trap is ongoing. So our next step, this was our first kind of field deployment of the smart traps, and we learned a couple things. We'll probably change up some of the solar power component maybe a couple of the trapdoor components, of some of the mechanical aspects of the trap. But yeah, like the next step is really to kind of get that 2.0 version of the trap, if you could say.
Yeah. So you're continually refining it, obviously, to make it more precise and.
Yeah, so we can get it out to natural resource managers so they can, have an impactful removal effort. And then, of course, to adapt it to different species. Like we have 2 species of iguanas, green iguanas and spiny tail iguanas. We have invasive Nile monitors in Florida. All of those could be good candidates for trapping, as well as there's also applications, vast applications for native species and species of concern that you may want to trap and don't have the resources, or those animals can only, shouldn't be in a trap very long if they are trapped for stress reasons. So yeah, there's a lot of applications, and it's really just kind of opening up.
That's great.
Technology.
All right, well, Dr. Miller, we have reached the end of our time. Is there a place online where people that are listening might want to find out more about these efforts, or just your project could go to find out more?
Oh, yeah. So if they want to check out the traps, they can go to Wild Vision Systems webpage. So it's just wildvision.ai. And they can also go to the University of Florida our lab webpage, which is at the University of Florida Croc Docs. And long story on that one. We also work with a lot of crocodilians.
You could probably search for it, though. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It should come up.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks so much for making the time to explain this all. It's fascinating, and sounds like you're up against a formidable foe with these tegus bringing all the resources to bear. But it sounds like the technology has helped tremendously in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're hoping so. So we got our fingers crossed. So thank you for the attention to the issue and your time.
Thank you so much for joining us on Talking Animals. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you. Bye-bye.
In a moment, I'll speak with Marion Guzdal about Advocates for Service Animal Partners, Inc. He's CEO of the Tampa-based organization. And September is Service Dog Awareness Month. We'll hear more in just a moment on Talking Animals on WMNF. Right now, we're going to step into the Comedy Corner and play a piece called We Gotta Save the Bees from Greer Barnes in today's Comedy Corner on Talking Animals on WMNF.
On the state that if all the bees on the planet died, that the birds would be next, and then us. And my boy is like, we gotta save the bees. That shit is real, that's real. Now that I think about it, I ain't see a bee all summer. Now you informed. Now go inform the other brothers. Take this with you. Then the narrator goes on to say, the European bee is a much more kinder and gentler bee, as opposed to the Africanized bee, which is a much more aggressive, hostile bee. Really? Just gonna try to sneak racism into the bottom? Like European bees are floating around like... So, what are we going to do today? I don't know. Maybe we can pollinate these flowers.
That was Greer Barnes in today's Comedy Corner with a piece called We Gotta Save the Bees, taken from his performance on Don't Tell Comedy. Now it's time to speak with Marion Guzdal about the Tampa-based nonprofit he leads, Advocates for Service Animal Partners, Inc., or ASAP. And, of course, this September is Service Dog Awareness Month. Let's hear more by welcoming Marion Guzdal back to Talking Animals on WNF. Good morning, Marion.
Good morning, Duncan. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be on with you again this year. I appreciate that.
I appreciate you making the time to join us. So, not quite a year ago, we did speak at length about Advocates for Service Animal Partners, or ASAP. Let's start today maybe with just a brief review, like an elevator pitch on ASAP, its history, its mission, and so on.
Sure. Advocates for Service Animal Partners is the only organization in the United States that focuses specifically upon securing, protecting, and enhancing the civil rights of individuals who use service dogs. And so this month being Service Dog Awareness Month, we're launching some new materials and resources for businesses and for people who use service dogs. And this is a great opportunity to share that with your listeners.
And what are some of those resources at this point?
Yeah, so we've identified through our hotline, we operate a hotline across the United States. It's 855-ASAP-211. And most of the calls that we get deal with either healthcare facilities, hotels, restaurants, or retail establishments. And so we've created specific table tents for those industries so that they can download them and fold them and put them on their customer service counters, display them at their registers. And we've also included with that a guidance document for that specific industry. So it's a one-page document that they can duplicate and give to their staff, which outlines the rights and responsibilities of service animal handlers and the businesses that we patronize. So that's all going to be available on our website. Actually, we're rolling out the page today, so if you go there and it's not there yet, come back and it'll be there soon. And it's at Service Animals, that's plural, serviceanimals.info is our website address.
And do you find still a fair amount, Marion, that there's questions or even disputes about certain businesses that you mentioned that you work with, and where the rights end and begin for service animals that are trying to patronize those businesses?
Well, that's one of the things that we do with this document is what we're hoping we do is we help businesses understand that they have certain responsibilities under the law, but they also have certain rights as well. And that helps the businesses feel a little more comfortable when they welcome someone with a service animal into their business, because they also know that the animal must be kept under control, has to be kept on a leash, and if it's out of control, the business has the right to ask the person to remove the animal. So we have a lot of challenges with people who take their untrained animals into places where pets are not allowed. And it's not only that the pets aren't allowed, but the animals themselves aren't acclimated and socialized to those types of environments. And many times when we encounter an untrained dog, it usually causes problems for our legitimate service dogs. So we help businesses understand that issue as well.
Well, that's great. I think anything that can serve to educate people so there's not friction or worse in those kind of settings is fantastic, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what constitutes a service dog, much less what their rights are and what the rights, as you note, of the business in question as well.
Yes, very good. Yes, and so you know, the business wants these resources. They're easily available, and they're free of charge. Just go to our website again, serviceanimals.info, and off the home page there will be a link to Service Dog Awareness Month, and those resources will be there, including our brochure. So that's a good thing just for people to download, print off, and just drop off in places where they go. I do that all the time with my business cards that have Braille on it, and I'll bet my business card gets a lot of traction and a lot of views because of the Braille that's on it itself. It's something that people are very interested in.
I'm sure. Well, Marion, we have just about reached the end of our time, but thanks for filling us in more on Advocates for Service Animal Partners, and of course that it's Service Dog Awareness Month, and the information that's going to be available later today on serviceanimals.info. Thanks again for all your great work and helping us understand things better.
And thank you very much for yours, Duncan. We appreciate it.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We have just about reached the end of today's edition of Talking Animals. Coming up on WNF, it's The Conversation, the great show hosted by Mario Nunez and Joaquin Carter. After that, it's The Scoop, WNF's brief news recap. Then we shift back to music programming with Sally sitting in for Sam Vall today from 1 to 3, followed by Stu Millis, who's sitting in for Nancy C. today. Traffic jam from 3 to 6 p.m. And it just continues with all kinds of great music after that on 88.5 FM. It's Talking Animals on WNF Tampa.